Okay, so Photoshop opens. Similar to Premiere, we have last recent used files. If you want to learn stuff, there's a Learn tab, and that can give you access to a lot of great tutorials that Adobe has. And then, of course, you can also integrate this with Lightroom, as disclosed there, and any cloud documents you might have. Just like Premiere, if you also hit Create New, it has a lot of preset things. So along the top row there, you have photo, print, art and illustration, web, mobile, and of course for us, film and video. And if you notice off to the side in the preset details, you can actually change these, modify these, and save it as your own preset, which is really awesome. So we're gonna go ahead and close this out, and then we are gonna go to Open, and we're gonna start with our photo file, and here we go. So we have this kind of interesting photo. If we go to details, so that's in image size, you can actually see that this is an 800 DPI resolution image, but it's also extremely tiny. So if we do need to enlarge this, we can also downsize this so that it becomes larger, because again, working in video, you're not gonna work over 72 DPI. Where this comes in handy is when we transfer it to a 1080, then it'll actually be slightly bigger than expected. Cancel out of this. So the first thing we need to do is unlock the layer as a background layer, and all you have to do is double click on that. And I like to call this Original. And then hit OK. And that way that lock will disappear, and now you have a layer that you can manipulate. So to duplicate, the fastest way is just to highlight this and hit Control-J or Command-J on a Mac. I like to call this first layer Layout. Now this is just kind of a pre-planning idea. And what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna draw where we decide the different layers are gonna be. So I'm just gonna grab a paintbrush. The fastest way to do that is just by hitting B on your keyboard, and that gives you the brush tool. Now if you right click over the picture, you will actually get your brush sizing and shape options. So you want this to be kind of a fat chunker, but you know, it's just to kind of make a visual mark of where things are going. And I tend to pick bright, obnoxious colors and just start outlining things. By holding down Shift and dragging, you can create a straight line. If you have to stop, make sure you let go of Shift, because if you click again, it will connect. So release Shift, click, then hold Shift down, and you can continue your straight line. And what I'm doing is I'm marking out the difference between my full background with the stadium, and I'm looking at the fact that the cameraman has a shallow depth of field here. So I'm looking at where the grass kind of blurs versus where the grass stays in focus. And in the foreground there, you can see all the grass up front is pretty blurry. So it's just a matter of providing enough area to create these different levels. So this is kind of where I look at the big picture and go, how many layers do I have? So I have my foreground layer, I have my middle ground layer, I have my two soccer players, I've got my stadium, and then the sky behind me. So I have 6 layers I have to contend with. As I go back to my original, and then I hit that shorthand, either Command-J or Control-J, and I just make 6 copies. And I tend to work from the back to the camera. So the first layer is actually going to be our sky layer. And this makes sense in terms of order of operations in After Effects to work back to front. So that's our stadium layer, midground, lower player, our top player, and our foreground. Technically, you don't have to separate out the sky with the stadium, but I am, because I'm going to add a little bit of drama by adding an animated sky. Turning off all the layers, we are going to start doing layer masking. And this is why it's destructionless workflow, because you can actually bring the data back if you remove it from the frame. If you use the eraser tool, it's gone. If you save and close this file and then open back up and go, oh crap, I deleted this thing I shouldn't have, you can't get it back. But with a layer mask, you can get it back. Before we get into making a layer mask, we're gonna add one new layer, and we're gonna fill that layer with a desaturated color. So to add a new layer, it's just right down here. There is also a shortcut, but it's just quick to just hit that little square with a plus. And we're gonna pick a desaturated cool tone color because it's just easier on the eyes. Use the paint bucket tool, which is G, and we're going to put that underneath our layer so when we start deleting things, we can actually see what we're doing versus staring at a transparency grid. So with your sky layer selected, you want to add a layer mask, and that's right here with this little square and a black circle in the middle. That's the fastest way to add a layer mask. Now I want you to notice there's a difference between the photo layer and the sky layer, and as I toggle between the two, you can actually see my color palette up in the top right change. When I'm on the photo, if you see your foreground and background colors, they're actually retaining color. But if I'm on my layer mask, I only get two options, black or white. And that's the colors we're going to be painting in. White reveals things, black hides things. So if we're just getting the sky, we just basically need to delete everything down below. So what I tend to do to kind of make the work not so tedious at first is get a big old fat brush and I change my foreground color to black. Now the fastest way to do that is just hit X on your keyboard, and when you hit X it toggles between the two. You want to drag this along the top. And again, you can choose to get close, but I'm doing this really to create a barrier. And then the next thing I do is I just crank the size of my brush and I just clean up the rest. And again, just that little bit of barrier makes kind of doing the rest of this kind of sweep and clear all that easier. Now to get the rest of the roof line details, you would want to zoom in, which you can use Control or Command plus. And using your spacebar, you can get your hand or your pan tool so you can actually grab and move around. We have this little top of the stadium, which is a non-organic object, but it is a curved object. I'm still going to use an old school tool that I love, which is the polygonal lasso tool, which is located up there. Now, traditionally, you probably only see the lasso tool if you click and hold or hold Shift plus L. Once you've selected the tool, you can toggle through things, and that'll get you to your polygonal lasso tool. And then you can click anywhere and it creates a straight line. So if you have a bit of curve to an object, you do have to click a little bit more frequently. But what's nice about this is you can click, let go, walk away, whatever you need to do to make your mind not explode doing tedious computer work, and you can come right back to it. And that's really nice. I know students, they try to do the cheats, but honestly, the better you get at these hand tools, just the faster you'll be able to knock something out when it's stubborn. Again, my husband's kind of piloting this for me with my broken hand, but notice you can go outside of the frame, and you really kind of want to think about like, where would the photo go if the photo didn't have that border? And so now that he has everything selected, before he hits delete, we need to switch our colors so that the black is now our background color and not our foreground color. So when we hit delete, it goes away, boop, and we're done. And that's blocking just the sky. So I'm just gonna fast forward this at this point. We'll slow it down once we get to some pertinent stuff, but we're gonna take out what's easy quick here. This is a good spot to save. Again, name it MMD110. I tend to call this my working file, and then I will resave this later as an AE file specifically. So that way if this file gets corrupted or I go too crazy trying to clean things, I have my original starting point to fall back on. And if you have a Wacom tablet, or any kind of tablet, if you're doing this on a mobile device, a tablet device, you can use the pen tools, which are really, really nice. If I want to be super nitty gritty, I use the lasso tool, but you can also really whip this out if you are used to using a pen tool. So it really kind of doesn't matter. If you're a paintbrush kind of person, great. If you're a pen tool kind of person, because you know Illustrator, it's far much more finicky to use the pen tool in Photoshop. So I just like to use the lasso tool. I like to work in sections at a time. If you try to tackle like the whole leg and you misclick once, you have to do all of that work all over again. Even that's kind of a large chunk. If you have to zoom in to see detail, you don't have to constantly be zooming out or pan tooling. Just like right here, you could go from the toe to the knee and then close out your loop and move down. Do it in small chunks because that'll spare your sanity. When you get to the pedestal, as I like to call this is the only time I will tell you that you should use a really soft brush and just kind of fuzz the edges of the pedestal. B for brush, and yeah, you can select that soft round, which is a default brush, and just kind of slowly etch around the grass area, and that way you get not such a hard line, and you want to make all of it kind of soft around here because the guy is touching the grass, and when you have a character that has contact with the ground, you kind of have to leave a little piece of that ground around them and be very aware of how far away you move your midground because you don't want it randomly parallaxing in that spot. So I try to get this as soft as I can, and then I'll go in with a smaller brush to kind of get as close to that arm as I possibly can. And then just leave it as such and then go back into doing detail work. So when you come into difficult areas where either anatomy seems kind of vague or hidden, you're basically at a best guess scenario. And this is the beauty again of destructionless workflow. If your client says, you need to fix that pointer finger, you can instantly paint back that nub that's a little too sharp on the pointer finger there. You can do it in an instant. So it's super fast, it's super easy to kind of just flesh back out detail if it's lost. So that's kind of nice to know about that. And the other player, we kind of basically assumed where a head would be. We went straight across the face because you shouldn't be moving that leg quick enough to really reveal a nose or anything like that. So that's kind of the beauty of it. When things become vague, best guess scenario, and if you need to be able to see it clearer, you can also just put a contrast adjustment layer on this. That way you can actually tweak this. You can up the brightness, you can tweak the contrast, you can kind of tailor it to be extreme if you're having a hard time judging what's what. That's kind of nice in terms of compositing. This darker area where his shoe and the cleats are doing something interesting, you can choose to really up the contrast, but then you can bring down the brightness, you know, so you can see other things. So it's kind of nice to be able to have that if you're trying to suss out what's what. So we've got the top layer now isolated, and now we're going to do the last layer, which is the foreground layer. We can move the brightness and contrast up above. You see that little blue line, then you know it'll go to the layer above. And again, you can use this however you want, but for right now we're going to shut that off, and we're going to add a layer mask to the foreground layer. And this one you can be right sloppy with. You can get a big old fuzzy brush, and then we're just going to kind of make a fuzzy line where we see the defocusing happen. You can keep some of the in focus stuff. Again, this is destructionless, so when we find out we have gaps, we'll know where we need to fill in. So I'm just going to kind of loosely, organically sweep this across, because I do feel that the focus actually is kind of diagonal for some reason. And then everything above, you want to switch back to your hard round and just take it out. Want to make sure that there's no trace of that dude there. So with this, you can now turn on all the layers, and if you have large gaps or things that just aren't overlaying properly, like we can see that's super bright, but then when the midground happens, voila. All right, so now we can see where our gaps are. We have small gaps up at the top with the stadium and the sky, but those you can actually leave alone, because I'm going to replace the sky. If you were to use this after you cleaned it all up and got rid of the color tinting, it's just basically a gray layer, so you could actually replace that sky with a similar fill color and no one would be none the wiser. We can see that we have our soft fuzzy brush in our foreground has kind of left us with a lot of like weird opaqueness. We want that to blend perfectly into the foreground. So we're gonna take our brush, make sure that it's on the white painting, and we're just gonna clean up those edges so there's no blue. And that makes it a seamless meld. And the same is going to kind of go for the stadium layer, because we have that big gap of blue there. And now our background melds with our middle ground and our foreground, so we don't have any gaps. Et voila! You're pretty much done. This is a great save point. So the next phase is basically to do cleanup on the layers, to get rid of any chingaderos, any hair, little water spots, dust, scratches.